Hi, English 110, welcome to Friday. It's Professor Sasso, and I thought I'd do a quick check-in on a couple of important things before we start the weekend. And I meant to do this a little bit sooner, but I just got the stomach bug and I'm now just getting over it. So I hope all of you are staying well. It's definitely going around right now. And if sickness has gotten in the way of you turning in your assignments, and just let me know. I know how it is. It went through our whole family this week, so. Okay, the very first thing I want to talk about is that I have posted what I call estimated grade at midterm. We are moving into midterm next week. We're in week 8 and we're about to go into spring break. You will have work next week and some things I'd like you to do or consider over spring break, but I try not to overload you too much for the break. So the midterm grades that I've posted is a culmination of what you've done in the class so far. And some of the important things to note is that if you are consistently getting on that 0 to 10 scale, if you're consistently getting a 7 to 7.5, that's about a C minus or a C. And the way I consider grades is that C, a 7.5, means that you completed the assignment, you met all of the requirements. As we get into 8s and 8.5s and 9s, that means you went above and beyond the assignment in some way. You may have offered something really new to consider about the reading. You may have taken the extra time to write more. Your MLA probably looks pretty good. So a good way to judge kind of are you meeting that C level is on some of those smaller assignments, those 10-point assignments. Are you getting up above that 7.5 or 8? So the estimated grade, basically the big things that affected it were if you hadn't turned any work in. So the work you turned in may be okay quality, but that there's a lot of zeros in those grade columns. And I know we did a lot of little assignments in those first few weeks. We did reading, you had to do some type of short writing sample. You may have had to respond to a peer. So there was kind of a lot of small assignments that as the weeks have gone on, people have not been completing, and that will affect your overall grade. Going forward, the major assignments in the class really will be, you can expect 3 things are going to happen every week. One, you're probably going to still read something. You're going to be conducting research or using that research to draft an essay. So these next weeks where we are simply writing essays, it's going to be research, draft, revision, research, draft, revision. So you can kind of like start to get it in that cycle. And we started that cycle this week. You're working on a revision and you're also looking ahead to the research for essay 2. So not turning a draft in was also a big thing. If you haven't turned essay 1 draft in, it's really, really important right now that we start actually putting what we've learned in the first part of the semester into practice by writing, by actually composing short essays. Our very first essay, which you'll see in my revision notes, was really supposed to be an informative essay in which you just simply told us what the conflict was, which that's not simple, that's difficult, and then what information we need to understand the conflict. And I think people have gotten a little confused that, we ask you to write persuasive papers all the time, right? Well, this paper was really just supposed to be informative. And the difference between the two is that you're not proving one side. And I know you've all picked controversial, well-debated topics that you feel strongly about. But for right now, the reader should just very much feel like at the end of essay 1, you've told us some of the basic information we need to know, and we're then going to move on. Okay, so I shouldn't feel as a reader like you've tried to prove one side or the other. And I'm not sure if I was clear enough about that. So in the revision notes, you'll notice that I talk about that. But anyways, we'll talk about that in a minute. So back to the grading. So the estimated grade, if you're below a C or C minus, it's most likely that you haven't turned in a lot of your work. And I would highly, highly suggest giving me a phone call or popping into my office so we could see what you can still make up if your grade is anywhere below a C minus. You really want to try to get to that C level in the class. And again, like I've said, that's all about kind of meeting the requirements of the assignment. So for a draft, if you've got a 19 or above, you completed the assignment. You might have had some issues with MLA or some formatting, but at least you try to get to the page length. You put in-text citations in. You've started to form paragraphs. Those are some of the things we look for in a draft. In your revision, obviously that should be a step up from that draft. Your MLA should really look good. Your paragraphs should really be between 8 to 10 sentences. You probably needed to add additional paragraphs. You may need to reorganize. This essay really should look like it took on a new life form, and it really got transformed in the second draft. If you're looking for my notes about your revisions, those are on the discussion board, and you'll see instructor comments right under where your peer reviews are. There's a post. The only thing is when you're in Word, you have to, you'll see like a little box where there's comments. You have to scroll over that box, and my comments will open up. So you should see comments all the way down the margin of your paper. And if you're not seeing those, let me know, because that's where I typed in all of my comments. If you don't know how to use the comment screen on Word, please let me know, because I want to make sure you've seen all of the comments that I gave you. So anyways, this revision will be a big part of your grade too. It's the first time that you're getting graded out of 100 for something. It's your first major assignment in the class. So it's really important that you've turned in a draft, and now you're working on that draft to turn into what I call a graded draft, sort of a final draft. This will then end up being used again when we set up your entire research essay. This is supposed to serve as the introduction to that. So if you have questions about your grade or about that estimated grade, please let me know, and we can talk individually about that. So like I said, this week, as you go into your weekend, some of you have already started working on your revision. It was nice to see a few of you come into the computer lab this past week, and we worked on your revisions together in the class. We'll have 2 more of those coming up next week. We have one on Monday between 11 and 12. And then I think another one on Tuesday or Wednesday, I think. But I'll make sure to repost those so you know. And those aren't mandatory. And for the people that came in, it was really just some good one-on-one time with the instructor to say, hey, what am I doing? How's my draft? Let's go over some things you don't understand about the class. I think it's really important to start taking advantage of some of the tools, especially if you've fallen behind in the class. English 110 is not an easy class. I'm teaching 2 of them in person, and it doesn't get any easier online. It doesn't get any easier in person. It really is about the writing and research process, and there's a lot of little pieces that go into it. So anyways, I invite any of you to come to those lab times next week, because you will be finishing your revision over the weekend and starting your research for Essay 2. In Essay 2, again, I have to insist that we understand this, is that we are still just providing information. We are still staying up as the objective middle point in our topic. We cannot begin to argue until we at least have gathered enough information in order to do that. Essay 2 is going to ask you, okay, here's a conflict. Let's just take vaccinations in America. There's people who think they're harmful and people who think we must do it because they're beneficial. Okay? I'm going to ask you, okay, let's talk about the people who think they're harmful. What are their major arguments? Why do they feel that way? And you're going to be doing some research to find out what's wrong with vaccinations. But you're also going to be doing research as to the benefits of vaccinations. So again, you're setting up the 2 sides, but you're not choosing one. You're just telling us what are people arguing about? Why is this a big deal? And what are their major arguments? It's almost like a debate where everyone gets to set up their points first, and then you start arguing after that. Okay, so the next essay, the research that I've asked you to go and do is to start gathering some of the arguments from each side. And I point you to a database called Points of View for that. Most of your topics are right there on Points of View. And what Points of View does is it gives a really basic overview of the conflict in the 2 sides. And it also gives you really good works cited bibliography information that you can go find some articles elsewhere. I've also asked you to look at editorials from newspapers, because some of the best support from one side or the other comes from editorials. And I want you to be able to understand that we have this huge database that's all newspaper sources. It's not the easiest database to navigate, so do your best when you're on there. Same with Points of View. Your topic might not come up right away, and you might have to do some digging. But that's kind of the whole point. We'll do one more research exercise before we start Essay 1, where I ask you to go back to the internet and find organizational sources that set up the 2 sides. So the easiest example is, for gun control, the NRA would be a source from side 1. and maybe, you know, Mothers Against Gun Violence or something would be another organizational site. So we're going to go back to the internet next week and see what organizations support one side or the other. Because Essay 2, like I said, is simply answering the question, who is arguing and what are they saying? What are the major arguments from both sides? Without any persuasion. Just here they are. Okay? The essay after that, Essay 3, will say, okay, here are the major arguments, but if side 1 gets what they want, let's say if side 1 is vaccinations are harmful and we should stop vaccinating our children, we're going to ask you the question, what will happen if we stop vaccinating our children? On the other side is vaccinations are really harmful, are really beneficial. If we keep vaccinating our children, this is what's going to happen. So we start to set up the cause and effect, the consequences of what's going to happen. For gun control, it would be if we do not restrict our gun laws, what's going to happen? If we do restrict our gun laws, what is going to happen? Okay. And then the very last essay we write is about bringing these two sides together towards some solution or compromise. That's when you're persuasive in this essay. And we'll talk more about how to do that. But right now, consider this, at least the first two essays, the informational and the compare and contrast essay, where we look at both sides, they are just you providing information to your reader so we can understand this all better. Okay? So that's what we're moving on to. I really encourage you guys to use the tools that are provided in the class. Under Module 7, you'll see the short essay guide. It's a really good guide for revising your essay. The OWL Produce site is really good for how do I do these in-text citations. There's 2 student samples that I think are pretty good examples of how to write really good paragraphs. There's the revision notes where I say specifically what we're looking for and what you need to work on for content. All of those, as you click through those documents, are supposed to be tools. And what I'm finding actually is that my online students, you guys are, from the work you've been turning in, are actually using